a bit more specific to metal instruments, the big one for everyone is guitars. I think that's the one thing when I search on
Hmm.
YouTube, and it's one of my most popular videos is making good guitar sounds. I think Impulses in recent years have really sort of raised the game for the home musician who's hasn't got a guitar amp or has sold it, doesn't have access to it, or can't blast it out because of the neighbours. Have you got any other tips for helping someone at home getting that really big metal guitar sound?
Like you say, impulse responses are an amazing thing, and we've not had them for that long, so still quite a revelation. People still discovering them. I did a piece on our website just as a demo showing the use of them, and people were still like, wow, I had no idea you could do that. And, you kind of, when you've been using them for a while, you assume that everybody knows about it, but not the case. So
I still get people asking me
What?
how they can get a good sound out of Amplitube or Guitar Rig, and I'm like, don't
Yeah.
bother, just use an Impulse and some of the free stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just bypass the cabs. Yeah, that's the first thing you can do is bypass the cabs and use some good impulses. But yeah, impulse responses are definitely a good start. I mean, they're pretty darn close to the real thing. And like you say, if you've got no access to actually blast them out, then they're a good option. There are VST plugins that are specifically built with impulses built into them. There's free ones or there's paid for ones. So there's a lot out there. But realism, it's a tough one. Everybody, it's like guitar tone. Everybody's got a different idea on what's a good guitar tone. But
Yeah.
a little bit of room space helps. Not too much that it drowns things out, but a little bit of room
Helps
space.
with the realism.
Yeah, definitely. So wouldn't say a reverb as such, but a room verb of sorts that gives a bit of space that can certainly help. Careful EQing, maybe.
Yeah, that's. I mean, my next question really is the sort of balancing of the guitar with the bass.
Yeah.
And then obviously that leads on to balancing the bass with the kick drum. With metal, there's always this juggling going on.
Yeah.
Is that you try and EQ something and you've always got to think 2 steps ahead as to what else needs that space or can give up some of that space.
Yeah.
And I think the big problem people have is sitting the bass in between the guitars and the kick.
Yeah.
And making sure the guitars don't sound too thin. Any tips on bass in particular about how to let that sit properly?
Yeah, I mean, guitar tone in general, I mean, I can step back very slightly and lead into that, but guitar tone in general, you always find when you're trying to come up with a guitar tone, you can get something that sounds absolutely awesome when it's the guitar on its own. Stick it in a mix and it just drowns everything. And so you've got to sort of approach things differently. I mean, that's all very well for maybe a solo piece or something, or if you're just doing just a guitar piece, but you find that a guitar tone that works well in a mix sounds completely different if you solo it out. And that's, like you said, making room for things. So bass in general, I would say make some room in the guitars for the bass to start with. Think of the bass as low end padding for the guitars. So you got to kind of high filter the guitars a little bit. Guitarists won't like you taking some of their low end out either, but they're always trying to get big deep cabinets to get a big sort of ballsy low end sound, which is great for live stuff on stage. But if you're doing a mix, you want to carefully juggle that kind of crossover point between the low end of the guitars and the sort of mid-high bass end. So you want the bass to basically be there reinforcing the guitars. So if you put a low cut filter on the guitars, basically slide it up and down the frequency range while your bass is playing as well, and find a nice spot where it crosses over quite nicely, and basically almost treat them as instruments to be complementing each other. So I'd say high filter the guitars so that the bass fits in there. And then with the kick drum, again, careful crafting with the EQ. Really, the bass is going to be fairly dominant anyway, but if you want sort of the low end out of the drum, you can side chain the bass so that when the kick drum plays, it ducks the bass a little bit in certain frequencies to sort of let the kick drum come through.
I'll be doing a video on that for any of the subs that don't know what he means by side chaining. I will be covering that at a later.
Okay, cool. Okay. And carving out frequencies that don't matter in the kick drum, even a good example of some quite extreme, and it sounds good. I mean, if you mentioned to me before that you've got the Waves SSL bundle, and if you look at Chris Lord Alge's presets for that, you see some of his kick drum presets, and he's quite extreme, where he'll take he'll say choose 500 hertz on the kick drum and just cut everything out, and maybe put like a 50 hertz slight boost and a 5k slight boost. So you got all fives there, but you got basically 50 hertz boost, 5k boost, and 500 hertz complete scoop out. So all that mid range is all gone from the kick drum, and you have literally the low end thud and the high end click, and that's kind of the bit that cuts through. So you've got a bit of room in the mid range there for your guitars and your bass to be around. So like we said, it is a juggling thing, but I think if you can either sidechain the bass with the kick so that it pulls out the way slightly, and it's again a careful balance to not get it so that it's pumping like a techno track, just enough to maybe make a bit of space, and it's hard to be specific because the sounds are all different, but as a general rule, juggling those three together, and just knowing the frequency ranges that are getting in the way. So just set up an EQ with a boost on it and a fairly tight cue point, and boost it right up, and just sweep around listening for those bits that get on your nerves, and maybe that's the point you want to scoop. So just invert that completely and scoop that bit out. So just sweeping around with EQ.
Yes, people they always seem scared to just try things and to just set things extremely and just see what happens. And that's the only way to really learn about the sounds and how they work well on their own and together.
Yeah, just kind of hoping and going with the flow and seeing what happens doesn't really make you learn anything as such. So if you can sweep around frequencies and note those frequencies that you hear that are the ones getting on your nerves, the invaders as such, then you'll remember that next time, and you go, that last time I got a good tone if I cut like 250 hertz or out of this guitar amp or whatever, So just experimenting, and remember what you came up with when you experimented.
I wanted to ask you about maximizers, because I think they're something certainly I've told people to use when they're trying to get the best out of their home recording without taking it to any third party, anyone else to mix it or to master it. But I know if you were to speak to a mastering engineer, they would much rather you gave them the track without any maximizing, because they do certainly have their downsides, as well as making things louder. They can add in artifacts and that sort of thing. And what's your opinion on using a maximizer?
I guess it depends where your product's going to. If it's just a demo at home and you just want to make things loud, then okay, that's fine. But you have to watch that you're not just squashing the hell out of it for the sake of it just to get it loud. So I mean, mastering generally, as you know, is a completely separate process, and so home mastering as such should be treated like that. And if you literally just done a demo and you just want to get it loud enough for somebody to listen to on their iPod or wherever, then you can use it just as a sort of a volume control of sorts, but just watch the amount of gain reduction that's happening, because that's basically what's squashing your dynamic range there. So everything in moderation. I firmly believe mastering should be done by a second pair of ears, just because you've sat there for hours and hours laboring over your track, and so you mastering it as well, you're not necessarily going to notice things that could be improved in the mastering process. So maximizers as such, I suppose you're asking in just a volume increasing kind of way, just to get your stuff up to level. But I think mastering in general is about getting it up to level while trying to maintain dynamic range as much as possible, and also mastering engineers do a lot of careful EQing and stereo imaging, other things than just maximizing and getting it loud.
The mastering engineer's job is vastly underestimated by people who haven't necessarily looked into what they actually do. But there's a lot to it, and the other factor, I suppose, is as well the equipment they've got access to, which is normally far and beyond what anyone could afford to have at home, unless they were
a professional mastering studio, will have a lot of very nice gear quite often. It's not saying that it can't be done completely in the digital domain these days. There is good software out there, all-encompassing software that you can use to do that. But really, I think just the main thing is that it's approached with a different head, and even just having somebody else doing it with a different pair of ears. I think if you do anything in life and ask for somebody's thoughts on it, even you write a story, you get someone to proofread it. You can think of it in a similar way to doing your mixing. You basically getting a proofreader there that might spot some things that you haven't.
I've always been surprised actually when I have given my stuff to someone else, thinking they'll be happy as it is, and it comes back completely different to how I did it.
Yeah. And sometimes you might not like that, and so you might have to work together on coming up with some kind of alternative.
With maximizers, I think an important thing is moderation. You can use it to pump up peaks so high that it just sounds disgusting. And I have seen some absolutely horrible examples of this on YouTube, and it's just horrible to listen to. But to just
Death Magnetic.
oh God,
I'm joking. But I think if you're gonna use them, you're gonna do some home mastering, as it were. Just watch the gain reduction and see how much you're losing potentially out of your dynamic range, and just be gentle.
I guess my final question would be if you're sort of steering away from the maximizer in terms of a sort of cure all on its own for just beefing up your mix. Well, what would you choose if you decided you weren't going to send a mix off to anyone else? You just wanted to make it as good as you could at home, so that you give it to your mates and they think, yeah, that's a good mix. What would you put on your sort of master fade or your final mix bus to give everything that extra polish to give it that punch?
I would probably still treat it as two separate processes. So I mean, on a normal mix, I would maybe put some light bus compression, maybe just like the SSL bus compressor, just to very lightly and have the needle hardly moving, but just taking the extremes out. And then maybe a limiter. There's one by a company called Massey. It's called a 2007 limiter, which is only available for Pro Tools, so it's not a great example, but it's just a nice. It's a limiter basically, and it just to stop those above zero peaks.
Yeah, I'm sure Cubase would have a stock one that does a similar job, or there's like the Waves L1 would be another similar sort of example, I suppose.
Yeah. So and then I might actually mix it just into that straight away. So just do the mix slightly hotter than normal, and just mix into that. Otherwise, if I think that I might possibly send it somewhere, I would do my mix as usual, peaking at about -6 on my master fader, so giving a decent amount of headroom there.
That's a lot of headroom, isn't it? If you think about moving your volume down 6 dB, that's a noticeable difference.
It is, but then it's plenty of room, and with 24-bit systems, you've got lots of headroom there. So there's not before you hit the noise floor, you're not gonna start getting hissing and all sorts. So, but I mean, that's a decent amount to allow for mastering. And if I'm then gonna have something at home to send to somebody, I put a sort of mastering strip by Slate Digital called FGX, basically a mastering type compressor and metering and etc. I'd stick that on there maybe, and then I can easily turn it off if I need to bounce it out at a masterable level. So I don't really put much on there because I like to try and do as much as possible in the mix, and occasionally I might stick a very transparent EQ in there to make some finer adjustments, like the Sonox EQ or something like that.
Yeah. Do you ever use frequency analyzers to sort of get a visual idea of how things are coming out?
Yeah, I do actually. Yeah. And it's good to even have a look at one of those, if you've got a track that you're using as a reference track, look at that through one, and then look at your own through one afterwards. I mean, best not to try and rely on your eyes and use your ears more often than not, but it's a useful tool to have on there, just to have a look and see roughly where you are. So yeah, I quite often do that.
Yeah, I've found using them myself over the last couple of years. It can make quite a difference, especially with that EQ thing we were talking about earlier. If you're trying to find an EQ area that you're not happy with, sometimes you see this big peak on the frequency analyzer, and it just points you in the right direction. It can save a lot of time.
So yeah, using tools like that along with sort of while you're training your ears is definitely a good thing.
Great. Okay, well, I think we'll call it a day there. This has been a plenty long enough for our YouTube fans. Yeah, so
you're gonna have to chop it down.
I'll split it into 2 or 3 videos, I think, because it's a long ask getting someone to sit down for an hour to look at this in one go. But thank you very much for sharing some of your wisdom with us. I'm sure
no problem.
Lots of my subs are gonna get a lot of good knowledge there. So I'll put a link in the description for your podcast and your Facebook and Twitter, so people can bombard you with questions, no doubt, once they've
cool. Thanks very much.
Latched onto the one thing you said that you probably weren't sure about, and they're gonna hound you about it for months to come.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. I'll send you a link. I mean, I don't know if you want to link to it or not, but I'll send you a link where we interviewed an acoustics expert. If you want to hear a bit more about acoustic treatment, there's a podcast where there's a long interview with just him. So
yeah, do. I'll put that down in the description as well for people, so they'll be able to find that. So thank you very much, Neil Hester.
Thank you. Thanks for asking me, and enjoy. And thanks to everybody out there.